Earlier this year, it was announced that several white voice actors who voiced non-white characters on popular American cartoons such as The Simpsons, Big Mouth, and Family Guy would be stepping down to allow actors of appropriate backgrounds to fill those roles. Is this going to make a meaningful difference in the industry? Well, I get why it's being done, but by itself it's nowhere near enough, and could have a negative side effect if that's all that's being done. There are many voice actors of different backgrounds who just want to do their job, and there's a lot more to helping them flourish than only casting to identity. Here's why. So one of the great things about voice acting is that anybody can play any role, and things such as race, age, gender, appearance, or sexual orientation shouldn't contribute to how or why someone gets cast. You even have some subsets of the voiceover industry like anime dubbing that, on the surface, can highlight this lack of restriction, since no company really limits casting for Japanese animation to Japanese actors in America. Heck, most of the time, Seiyu voice everyone in the original audio for Japanese anime regardless of what the character might look like, and the same happens when media gets dubbed into Japanese. We agree with all of this. So then why is this video like a bajillion hours long? Well, just because a lot of these discussions don't always make the mainstream to nearly the same degree as those that involve more high-profile live-action work, doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't taken place at all. Tokenism is still a common concern in these discussions because no matter what they look like or where they're from, we still want the actor's actual skills to do the talking. However, for years, many actors who might be part of a specific racial minority and/or those who happen to be members of the LGBT+ community continue to fight their own uphill battle, just to get the chance to show off their skills. And while it is true that some have been fortunate enough to thrive in the industry without going through any noticeable hurdles, they continue to act more as the exception rather than the standard. There are so many more examples and personal stories worth sharing between different actors in the industry that paint a picture of a less than ideal casting landscape. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through everything, though keep in mind that what we do bring up could be relevant to other demographics of actors.
There are a couple of things I know they're bound to notice.
For starters, this is a pretty common discussion that pops up during animated films that often feature high-profile celebrities who don't do voice acting quite that regularly. The hope was that big recognizable names will help put more people in seats, and a lot of said recognizable names are often white even when they might happen to have a racial conflict with the character that they're portraying. The quality of the voice acting aside, most workaday voice actors don't usually have the same mainstream brand recognition as these actors, let alone voice actors of color, through no fault of their own, but rather as a symptom of what we're about to discuss. The desire to draw in as many people as possible can take precedent, and even if these actors manage to do a good job playing some of these characters, the idea that a non-white or LGBT+ actor might not have been given the chance to audition and prove themselves is disheartening. But even when we're not talking about high-profile jobs with millions of dollars on the line, this push to get the most marketable person possible can also affect Western television animation and even the English dubs for anime. Despite the fact that physical appearance really shouldn't be a factor in judging an actor's ability to act, there are unfortunately those who are still hesitant to introduce actors of color or of openly differing genders or sexualities under the pretense that they aren't as marketable as other actors that have come before them, even if they're only being marketed to a specific fan community. And it's especially a shame when there are a very vocal amount of consumers that help validate these suspicions without realizing the effects they can have on others.
It's what the liberals feared all along.
When it comes to the anime dubbing industry in America specifically, all of those issues can still apply, just on a much smaller scale comparatively. But you could also argue that this is a very specific consequence of a much larger problem that's almost specific to this industry. Despite being as large as it ever has been, the audition process for anime dubs has sort of stagnated in the past couple of years. For companies like Funimation Entertainment specifically, they have strongly contributed to the age of quick simul-dub turnarounds that have now become commonplace. However, in order to meet the growing speed and demand, auditions generally don't seem to happen nearly as much as they used to unless we're talking about major projects with a lot of promotion and backing behind them, like My Hero Academia or Dragon Ball Super.
My Hero Academia is one of the very rare instances of us actually holding auditions for a simuldub. Typically we do not. We the directors kind of just gun for it and are like, these are the people that will do the job and do a good job, and we have these time constraints and we just go for it. But My Hero was a rare exception in which we actually did hold auditions.
Which means less actors are getting to show off what they can do outside of a director's preconceived notions of them, while newer actors aren't getting the chance to show their stuff without a lot of luck and patience. Not every company is railroaded by similar crunch time, but some people might still just omit the audition process anyway, pre-picking their cast from old favorites out of sheer convenience. And I'm not just talking about double or triple casting in the same project, even though that can be an issue with the potential to break immersion. I'm talking about situations where those in charge of casting might just lazily cast someone they're already comfortable working with, because why bother when you know the people have already proven themselves capable to you in the past? If it ain't broke, why fix it? This in turn could lead to a lot more of the same actors being cast for projects. And, well, a lot of this industry is already comprised of white cis actors. This could be because many of them happen to stumble into the industry first thanks to their connections when anime dubbing became popularized, and/or due to their statuses as those who came in at the ground level, making them famous picks as time went on, at least in their own niche. Because of this, there isn't always much in the way of actor variety in general unless there's a specific push for it. Thankfully, there are plenty of people who have pushed, and we'll get to them in a minute, but take a look at most anime casts and you'll definitely be able to see the trends. So why does this happen? Well, sometimes those in positions of power who could have final say on these decisions might, consciously or not, be influenced by some form of bias. Blind casting, or the process of casting an actor while concealing their looks, name, and origin from your higher-ups, could be a potential remedy for this as demonstrated by the legendary Joe Barbera of Hanna-Barbera fame, who actually used blind casting to his advantage when introducing Scatman Crothers, a black actor, on the role of a cartoon dog. However, this is far from a common practice, and either through auditions done in person or being able to look them up online, casting directors will eventually learn more about the talents who are reading for them. On the one hand, most companies want to know who their actors are for other more benign reasons, like making sure their social media isn't insane, or that they've behaved well at past recording gigs. But on the other hand, revealing an actor's identity, though necessary at some point in production, is a double-edged sword for this very reason. And we've heard stories from actors who feel like they've been dismissed from certain roles after something specific about their identity was revealed. Sometimes it would even happen after they had already proven their worth as actors, and nothing about their actual performance seemed to have anything to do with them getting kicked out the door. In fact, some actors have actually felt the need to actively hide their identity because they've seen or have had reason to believe that such things would limit their career prospects.
On that whole assimilation note, that's the reason why my stage name is V-E-E, because when I was watching cartoons growing up, I never saw any Hispanic last names, and so I thought, when I was 12 when I made that decision, and I just thought oh, there aren't any Hispanic people working, maybe I have to change my name so I can get jobs. And I think back on that and I feel, it's really sad that that's what I believed.
Now, we try to be as open-minded on this channel and see things from as many different perspectives as possible. But I hope we can all agree that no one should ever feel the need to hide who they are just to work. And even if someone in charge of casting isn't explicitly prejudiced towards a certain group of people, there are other more subtle biases that could affect an actor's audition through no fault of their own or the casting directors. Because unfortunately, there are people who associate certain stereotypes to a person's voice before they even get the chance to hear them speak.
A lot of people will look at us and say, "Oh, I see you. Black man, black girl. We expect you to sound a certain way. You probably can only sound that way. That's what we're going to call you into audition for."
For the most part, whether a show is recorded in New York, Canada, Los Angeles, or Texas, most everyday characters will often use this neutral American sound when speaking. And during the audition process, if those in charge of casting are given any reason to assume that you can't produce this specific general American sound that has become the industry standard, then they might dismiss you offhand or be more strict when listening to an audition. And if you equate general American to something like white or straight, then right off the bat you're already making it harder for others who don't fit neatly into those categories. Certain non-human stylized characters may be made to sound different or given accents specifically as a contrast to that neutral way of speaking, which in turn can make them sound more memorable.
I can't understand your accent.
Though it appears that even these characters have become more the exception rather than the norm, and on paper this makes sense since these cartoons are primarily being marketed for an American audience. So even if you have a show take place in a fantasy world where no one even understands what humans are, most of the cast is still going to just happen to speak like some variation of this.
Can I offer you a human foot filled with holes? Bar of green human candy? Oh, how about this black shadow box that reflects only sadness?
This even carries over into how anime has been dubbed into English, even though technically there's no theoretical equivalence between American English and Japanese, or at least Japanese as it's spoken in Tokyo. However, at some point people have assigned a neutral American dialect as the standard sound that a dub should have, at least here in America. If history took a different course, whether it be with the Western anime industry or even globalization itself, things could be totally different, but for now, we're going to keep the focus on what is rather than what could have been. Now, as far as Western reactions go, if you randomly dub a character to have an accent, fans usually react negatively if there's no specific story reason behind it. Hell, even when an accent choice has a good reason behind it, like how a Valley Girl accent could be seen as a parallel to Gyaru, or how a Southern accent is often used in place of Osaka-ben, there is still a subset of fans that react negatively to their inclusion, and it often needs to get defended. When you're dubbing something into American English, it seems like common knowledge that you might have regional accents from all over the United States to represent characters from all over Japan. But that isn't always utilized or accepted by fans because this doesn't take place in the United States. So all Tokyo Japanese must become one consistent thing in the dub. And it seems that for some reason we've decided that thing is General American English. It's an ingrained bias and one that I unfortunately don't see going away anytime soon, so even if casting directors want to make a character sound more distinct when they think it can really elevate the show, it could be an uphill battle for everyone involved. 4Kids and a lot of 90s dubs probably had a lot to do with the community's knee-jerk negative reaction to accented characters. Back then, anime was riddled with over-the-top and borderline offensive accents that didn't always have a logical place in the shows they were inserted in. At best, these were done as a means of localizing a character's specific flavor of dialogue, or it was most likely done to mask the fact that multiple reoccurring characters were played by the same actors. Because again, the acting pool for such low-budget work was relatively low back then, before young otaku started to grow up with dreams of appearing in anime dubs, and before these companies could afford actors from other genres of voiceover. While at worst, this was a calculated push to make the shows feel more international by watering down the Japanese elements producers were afraid American children couldn't relate to. In fact, aside from a handful of examples, anime seemed to start adopting that neutral American sound around the same time that companies started getting away from the notion that anime needed to sound like a wacky Saturday morning cartoon. Maybe that's because cartoons in general also stopped sounding strictly like that. Or maybe it was a result of companies beginning to realize that anime was just as marketable without needing to dumb it down. Hard to say exactly if there was a singular reason or an amalgamation of others. I mean, it's not like that knee-jerk reaction to accents is strictly from examples 2 decades ago.
You truly are audacious. Shall I expound upon the torment you'll suffer at my hands? Don't care.
If you're going through auditions and see a person is black in their headshot, then you might make the very big assumption that they would automatically have what some people have wrongfully labeled as a street or urban accent.
Oh, what does that even mean? Urban. And so like one of the reads, I was like, I've never booked this, and I gave it the most racist, like, of course nobody sounds like this. I was so angry, like, dear, if you want it, it's gonna sound like this. And I booked it. Oh, and I was like, oh no.
Or if you're auditioning someone who happens to be gay or trans, then you might jump to other broad assumptions about their voice texture or pattern of speaking. If an actor is transitioning, taking hormones, or suffers from a disability that could affect their voice, that's something that you'll need to consider or work on when applying for auditions. In fact, some trans people do vocal training to change their voice into something that suits them more, which could take a couple of years, and some trans actors have an impressively big vocal range. And even if they can deliver that general sound, you might just think that they're suppressing what they really sound like. Or your mind could even be tricked into hearing an accent or effect that isn't there at all. In reality, that general American accent very likely could be a black, Spanish, Indian, gay, bi, or trans actor's normal speaking voice. And it really doesn't make them sound any more white or anything, just general American. It's accents and communities, not skin tones or preference that you're hearing. The problem isn't that there are some people who speak a certain way. The problem is the preconception that certain people are only expected to speak certain ways. I'm Puerto Rican and Haitian, but there are so many people who associate me with popular white YouTubers like James Charles and ContraPoints based off of my voice.
This is fine.
We can laugh about this, but it's a very different story when the inverse happens to otherwise talented people who are just trying to get work. The quality of this neutral American approach to voice direction aside, if an industry is built around a certain set of expectations, or if a director prefaces that they are looking for something very specific, then you need to have a good handle on the types of sounds you can produce if you want to succeed. But the issue is that when an actor unlearns an accent, doesn't even have one to begin with, or successfully adopts that neutral American sound, there are casting directors whose inherent biases might make them say something like, I can still tell that they're black, which would be immersion breaking on this Japanese character. In reality, even the most neutral sounding actors will have a bit of regional influence in their accent. All of us probably do, myself included. And of course, a white actor playing a Japanese character and a black actor playing a Japanese character achieve the same exact level of dissonance anyway. But if we can learn to accept that wiggle room for some, we also need to be able to accept that wiggle room for all kinds of actors. Even though it's literally an actor's job to portray a wide range of emotions and dialects, some directors might unintentionally assume that certain actors cannot break out of a type, or one at which they might not even be good at playing with in the first place. Because by the way, not all black actors are good at playing the urban stereotype, and not every gay actor might be able to deliver that over-the-top, stereotypically effeminate voice that's often been used to portray LGBT+ characters in a lot of past popular media. This is ridiculous, of course, and we're not saying that everyone in positions of power are that close-minded, but race and gender coding can be subtle, and if we want to do something about it, we can't deny that it is unfortunately baked into many facets of not just the entertainment industry, but society as a whole. Because not only does that bias prevent actors from even getting the opportunity to be judged on the merits of their abilities as actors, but even when they do get cast, it's usually to only fill a very specific role that has the chance to just reinforce said stereotypes. I personally couldn't blame a black or Latino actor for turning down a role if all they were going to be cast in for the majority of their career was the aggressive one, or if a gay person didn't always want to be called in just to sound gay as a form of protest. Not all of them are going to feel this way, but even if they turn down those roles, casting directors will eventually find people who are willing to portray those sounds.
We are asked to do the ethnic thing, and they don't feel that we sound ethnic enough. And this can happen to Asian people. This can happen to Hispanic people also. It happens all the time. They'll be like, okay, well, you don't sound the way we expect you to sound like. We're gonna get in somebody who is not from your culture doing the stereotype of what we expect you to sound like.
After all, this is voice acting. Anyone should be able to play anybody. Right? When it comes to cartoons, this can be a problem at the conceptual level, since a lot of characters are just written to be what other shows and media have perpetuated for years. They at least have the option to write characters that break these molds at multiple stages of production. Some just don't always choose to. But it's arguably harder with anime dubs because the show is already set in stone, and it's less common to see characters that can actually be coded as anything other than Japanese, or general for the terms of this discussion. Even if they do, it's a coin toss with whether they'll be treated respectfully, and another coin toss if they'll actually be cast to someone with a background that might better inform the character. So to combat this, those in charge of anime dub casting might try to take advantage of that coding and find those little opportunity characters, where they can introduce actors and push them to get the experience they need to climb their way up the ladder, or allow them to imbue some of their natural background into the way the character speaks. These characters might be explicitly from a certain place or of a certain sexuality, or they could just have traits that made the fandom retroactively adopt that character into being perceived that way. Then, if that actor gets more exposure, it'll be harder for other companies to ignore them. However, this just begs the question, why is it seen as better when a black American actor is cast as any dark-skinned anime character, accent or not? I guess it just seems like one of the few places where accents that people overwhelmingly associate with certain Americans get readily accepted and celebrated. I understand this reasoning isn't intellectually bulletproof though. There's the chance that some will just see this as another form of tokenism, while others might take that association too far, being informed by past stereotypes to the point where that's what you expect to hear from certain coded characters, even if they are properly represented at the casting level.
There's more diversity to diversity than a token. Like, I think as voice actors, we don't aspire to be a token. Like, that's not what we're asking for in diversity. So it's not just the way they're drawn, but like the depth of the characters. And, you know, LaShawn is really about that, and we connected on that.
Mirako is a fan favorite character from the My Hero Academia franchise, and it was a big question mark who was going to play her in the English dub. The character was eventually cast by Anaris Quinones, an Afro-Latina actress, and not only did she fill the character with the loud, confident energy that she needed, but she would arguably also feel right at home later on in the series when the character dips into her cultural influences on screen. And while this casting was largely praised by the community, there were some people who strangely accused the character of not sounding black enough, despite the fact that she was played by a black actress. Ignoring how completely ridiculous and damaging of a mindset this could be for people in the industry, even as a joke, there is definitely a balancing act that needs to be struck when casting certain actors in these roles. You want to give them the opportunity to show audiences their true voice, and if you want to help voice actors who would otherwise have their options limited by the rest of the industry, then a character like this can be a godsend. We hope this will lead to an industry where more fans and casting staff will eventually understand that not all actors who are considered BIPOC or LGBT+ are interchangeable with each other, nor should they be expected to sound a certain way while also opening up the possibility that they could. Plus, while these actors can still succeed on characters who aren't dark-skinned, and we'd all like to see an industry where black voice actors aren't always stuck playing the tan one in anime, those characters inevitably get more press and hype when a new actor people can identify with is revealed for the role because people do imprint on them. To quote renowned anime director Shinichiro Watanabe, who directed Cowboy Bebop back in 1998, "I paid a lot of attention to skin color, also to using multiple languages. Lots of times when you watch anime, the characters all have white skin. All the characters in fantasy stories all have white skin, which I never liked. I wanted to have lots of characters in Bebop without the white skin, and if people weren't used to that, well, maybe it would even make them think a little bit more about it." I'm sure most people understand that some of these creators didn't always intend for some of their characters to be BIPOC or LGBT+, but even when a character's race or sexuality isn't so clear-cut, people look for the characters that they identify with. And outside of specific examples, as far as BIPOC and LGBT+ representation goes, sometimes we're forced to take what we can get. Besides, sometimes none of these characters are meant to be speaking American English anyway. Sometimes these characters are Japanese, or aliens, or from some other world speaking a language that has never been translated before. So if everyone's going to be speaking English anyway, why not reach out to your entire audience in a subtle way that includes them in on the fun? We agree that representation within a biased system still isn't as good as a better system, and what we all want is an industry that continues to grow, pushing to get the best people possible for each project. Like we mentioned in our video on recasting, the idea of the best is entirely subjective, but we fail to see how broadening one's horizons could be seen as a bad thing. It's tricky because, if we look back, while some characters were just there to perpetuate stereotypes to this day, other characters did have influential performances behind them that still spoke to a lot of people, even if the actors didn't always reflect the identities or obvious influences of the characters. Going back and retroactively recasting for all of these roles in order to better reflect a character's skin color or sexual orientation might be seen as a good gesture on paper. But not only will it never be enough, it runs the risk of keeping the conversation in the past and taking it away from what could be done in the future. We don't want that to become the new industry standard, as it could still strictly limit what actors are seen as capable of, and diminish the value of some of those genuinely good performances. I think that, like us, a lot of people do not subscribe to the idea that a voice actor always needs to physically resemble their character or have XYZ traits in common to deliver a good performance. The last thing I'd want is, for instance, black voice actors only to ever get cast as black characters. Likewise for gay actors for gay characters or trans actors and trans characters, as such a standard would severely limit the potential and careers of these performers. Granted, while we don't think this should be taken to a completely pathological extent, sometimes that personal background can help, and we'd even argue that there are plenty of examples where it is more necessary depending on the story. An informed background or understanding of a character's inferred real-life struggle or home life can be key elements that help elevate the product as a whole. After all, sometimes life can and should imitate art, so why not have casting that comes close to matching the ambition of the original production? Now there are, unfortunately, some people who might think our solution is suppressing straight white voice actors, and pulling in others until there's an equal amount of everyone and everything, disregarding their ability as actors for the sake of meeting some imaginary quota. And, as a result, letting the quality of shows suffer in the name of diversity. That's not what we're suggesting at all, and in fact we'd argue that if you're someone who's entertaining that notion or using it as an immediate talking point in relation to this conversation, then you're also implying that there aren't plenty of well-qualified BIPOC or LGBT+ actors who aren't already talented, ready to work, and fighting to be heard. Just because you personally don't see or hear something doesn't mean it isn't happening, and even if they aren't perfect right out the gate, how can we expect some of these actors to grow if we never give them a chance? It shouldn't have to be a numbers game. It's about making sure voice actors feel welcome, making them feel like they can follow this dream just as much as anyone else, and show that there's at least the potential for them to get the same opportunities as everyone else instead of just being put into a box. Because here's the thing, if the stereotypes that some creators have helped popularize is all we get to hear, then nothing will really change because that will continue to perpetuate the types of sounds we think we should be, quote, expecting. That's something that has the potential to change in Western cartoons if showrunners stop writing specific people to be nothing but stereotypes. And maybe that could change if we give more people the opportunity to show off what they sound like. After all, not all black people sound like Boondocks characters, and not all Indians sound like Apu from The Simpsons. One of the advantages of Western cartoons is that these characters could still be worked on while they're being cast and recorded. So there's the chance that a compelling enough performance could end up influencing the creation of a really compelling character, even when it might not be consistent with the world that they're written in. This in turn could lead to more experimentation, which could lead to more opportunities down the road for people with different types of speech. And if anime dubs are going to continue taking cues from how other cartoons sound, then maybe that experimentation can also pop up there. If the strict adherence to the neutral American accent was one of the reasons we got to this point, then maybe it's time we start being more open-minded to the fact that anime can have more than just one sound. There's nothing inherently wrong with anime adopting a more streamlined vocal delivery for the sake of consistency. We're not saying we want to go back to the 90s, and changing things up really shouldn't be arbitrary. But if every show should be judged on a case-by-case basis, then maybe it's worth entertaining the fact that, while that neutral sound might work for some shows or some characters, it doesn't need to be applied to all of them. I think it's safe to say that we're past the point where every anime is being made strictly with the Japanese market in mind. So maybe dubs should stop strictly catering to the American audience as well. I know some people hate the idea of anime being more global, but if it is, why can't that also be reflected in the people we hire and the performances that we hear? I'm not saying we'll get it right the first time as we expand that idea to other shows, and there might be a rough transition phase where more directors and actors take risks on the types of sounds that could be heard. You don't have to like them without merit. Never stop critiquing a medium if you genuinely want to see it improve. However, I fail to see how taking such chances will ultimately lead to a worse industry down the line. People of any identity can sound like a very wide variety of things, and you can't lambast any individual for being inauthentic because sometimes that's honestly just their natural voice. So when it comes to applying this wide spectrum to characters in voiceover, can you see how allowing actors of these backgrounds to try auditioning and get cast in these roles can help us out? At the very least, they could be seen as a good starting point. And maybe if we're given more opportunities to explore a wide range of authentic accents and dialects, there's the chance that could also better our own appreciation for them, allowing us the opportunity to better disassociate the stereotypes from the real thing. In fact, one argument I'm anticipating from some people who have somehow made it this far into the video is, we never rationalize why anime characters have multicolored and possibly long spiky hair, so should we bother rationalizing what their voice sounds like in English? Honestly, I think maybe it's not just the location of the anime that needs to be considered, but also the actual creative goals. The Dragon Ball dub, for example, has several accents, but it's a wacky story about aliens and superpowered martial arts. Pokemon is a franchise that continues to take cultural inspirations from all around the world. And don't even get me started on the abundance of isekai shows that take place in worlds with their own modes of speaking completely separate from ours. Meanwhile, stuff like Your Name is a more grounded drama with plot points that relate specifically to Japanese culture and dialects, so everyone in the cast needs to fall in line with the original to make that work. As with everything, context is key. Granted, things have gotten a lot better than they used to be. There are more cartoons being directed or produced by people of many different races and sexualities than ever before, with some even going on to be amongst the most popular shows to have come out in the past decade. Not only has this in turn led to more stories being told featuring said races and sexualities in a more positive everyday light, but casting for these shows has also shown signs of being more varied than they used to. More LGBT+ friendly anime are also being dubbed than they ever have before thanks to the success from previous shows and pushes from people like David Wald over at Sentai Filmworks, while many more members of the industry are taking advantage of their more influential positions that can affect casting. The staff at NYIV Post and Sound Cadence Studios, on top of individual directors and teams at other studios like Funimation, are noteworthy with diversifying rosters and actively pushing to introduce new actors to voiceover. The former was in charge of projects like Tokyo Godfathers, which featured a trans actress in a lead role, A Silent Voice, which featured a deaf actress in a lead role, and even Cannon Busters, which ran the full gambit of being an anime that was produced by a black artist while featuring a predominantly black cast for its dub. We've also gotten the chance to see some Black, Indian, and East Asian talent break out into some amazing mainstream anime roles in the past few years, while actors of different sexualities and gender identities have taken up the mantles of some of the most well-known characters in the industry. I know to some people, these steps might not seem like that big of a deal, but not only can they be signs of real genuine change in the community, they can also have the potential to set an amazing example moving forward if we manage to keep this momentum going. For example, Zeno Robinson is an actor that has really flourished over the past 2 years in cartoons and anime alike. This year, he was cast as one of the main characters in the new Pokemon Journeys anime, which is probably one of the first times a black actor has played a partnership role alongside Ash in one of the most profitable mainstream anime in the world. When we did first get new companion characters like Iris, she was never really played by someone who reflected what many fans considered her to be. Personally, I believe everyone who has played Iris across mediums has delivered a good performance, and we did eventually have characters like Kiawe played by Mark Swint, who was one of the standout performances of the Sun and Moon dub. But Go and Iris stick out more prominently because they arguably share a more significant role alongside Ash, with both having just as much, if not at times more screen time than him in their respective seasons. Even if these characters don't have a clear ethnicity, if I was a kid growing up, I would immediately want to see myself in them. Then if I were to grow up and realize that these characters were played by somebody with the same skin color as me, maybe that would be enough to get me to think that I'd actually have a chance if I also wanted to lend my voice in cartoons. Which, if we're being honest, would be a huge improvement on the expectations that so many actors have already had to deal with. Don't get me wrong, we love the work that actors like Zeno, Anaris, Ryan Colt Levy, Casey Mongelo, and so many others have managed to achieve, but what we all want is collective success, not just individual success. We don't want these actors to become the new industry tokens that get cast in everything as a cover that things are just fine. Nor do we want people to keep looking at the success of the few and use them as a sign that nothing else needs to change. Something which I'm sure sounds familiar to at least a few people, especially those in positions of power who might show no signs of getting over their inherent biases. There may even be some companies who try to catch on to these discussions just for the sake of optics, allowing actors of all backgrounds to audition even when they probably had no intention of using them at all.
I would like to think that it's all genuine and everybody cares and it's from the heart, but truthfully say, I think not. It's more from the pocket.
And if they're not willing to listen to those struggling, then we might just have to wait until they're willing to step down or be replaced with people more open-minded. Or staff could try to show off as many varied actor portfolios as possible. But whether it's a casting director or even the official creators, if those who make the final say on casting aren't willing to budge, then it might all be for nothing until things change at that higher level first. For now, there are already plenty of issues that need improving on, such as offering better compensation for the services that lead to these dubs happening at all, which could act as an incentive to attract more varied actors. While the casting process needs to be expanded upon arguably more now than it ever has, so that we can actually get the chance to hear them. But if we can't find a way to combat the lack of open, anonymous auditions, then we hope casting directors who care will continue to push those who they feel really deserve a chance. Unfortunately, this is an issue that's pretty far removed from us and the rest of the anime community. But I also don't think this means there's nothing we can do on our end.
And I do hope that anyone who's listening who wants to be a voice actor who's scared of running into those biases and having difficulty climbing the ladder, I can't say that you won't run into it, because you will. And it sucks, and I hate that you will. But know that there are people out there who are waiting to hear you and who hope that you succeed.
We really don't know what a perfect vision for the voiceover industry might look like, but we do know that there's more that can be done, and we're very curious to hear any insight or opinions that others might have in the comments down below. Like we said at the beginning, this video only scratches the surface, and while I could make a separate video on the experiences of every individual race or identity, I think the message would still end up being the same. That being that things are still unfair and more pushes for change still need to be carried out. When a non-white or LGBT+ or disabled actor gets a role, and they maybe weren't the best choice, there are people who will, unfortunately, still try to connect their identity to their performance. Then, taken to an extreme, it has the potential to affect so many others in the long run. But we can honestly have it both ways, and the most that some of you would have to do is just listen. Yes, get the best person for the role, but actually give everyone a chance to show that they might be. We hope that fans and industry folk alike start paying attention to the genuine concerns that might creep up from time to time. because we know for a fact this won't be the last time we hear about this. And when this comes up again, we should all acknowledge that it's probably coming from a person who's only revealing a fraction of what they might have actually had to deal with every day. So listen to what these actors have to say, both behind and off the mic. Fellow actors and directors, continue to hype up your colleagues and set it up so as many people can hear them as possible. Make it so that their voices have a chance to be heard by everyone. We know that there are still a lot of people who might hear a performance and think, why was this character played by someone who is black, or gay, or Spanish, or non-binary, or Indian, etc., etc. And they might never stop asking those questions, no matter how much things might change. But for those people, it might be time to also start asking not just why, but also why not. Hey everyone, Eric here, and thank you all so much for watching until the end of the video. We understand there's a lot more to such a loaded topic than what we covered here today, such as covering other individual experiences as well as other demographics of actors. However, I really hope we were able to do this subject at least some kind of justice, and hope that people can walk away from this with a better understanding of why this is an issue that needed to be addressed in the first place. If you're looking for more in-depth information and want to know a good place to start, then you'll actually find a Google Doc in the description down below linking to articles, podcasts, interviews, and tweets all pertaining to this subject. And if there's anything in this video that needs to be tweaked, corrected, or updated, then check the pinned comment down below as well. We apologize in advance. Special thanks to all the voice actors and staff that shared their experiences with us and gave us a better perspective on things, as well as to those who took the time to review the final product. We really couldn't have made this video without you guys, and we're eternally grateful. Also special thanks to Mr. Nice Guy for editing this behemoth. You really did such an amazing job. And finally, a huge thank you to all of our patrons that continue to support us, including Marissa Lenti, JR Pictures, Reagan Senpai, Seth Phillips, Spartacus, Ahoba, Unknown Secret 1000, and Queen Era 2. This has been the Cartoon Cypher, and until next time.